What if the funniest characters in animation would be genuinely terrifying in real life? On Family Guy, Glenn Quagmire's behavior is always framed as a joke. Giggity, laugh track, next scene. The audience is never supposed to stop and think about it for more than a few seconds. But when researchers actually did stop and examine Quagmire's actions across the series, the results were disturbing. In 2019, a criminologist and a clinical psychologist published a paper arguing that Quagmire displays 14 of the 16 traits connected to her predatory personality profile. And once you trace the real-life inspiration behind the character, the entire joke starts to feel a lot darker. Animated characters are often allowed to do things that would never work in a real-life action show. Cartoons create emotional distance, making bad behavior seem less serious. Since 1999, Family Guy has used this style to turn violence, rude jokes, and shocking actions into comedy that viewers quickly forget. Quagmire became popular because of his funny catchphrase, pilot outfit, fearless attitude, and wild personality. Many fans enjoy how over-the-top and memorable he is compared to other cartoon characters. This discussion is not about canceling Quagmire or saying people should feel guilty for laughing at him. He is still one of the most entertaining and well-known characters the show has ever created. The real debate is about who Quagmire truly is beneath the jokes, laugh tracks, and funny scenes. When people study his actions across all 22 seasons, the character appears much darker than the show first presented. By the end, it becomes clear why Seth MacFarlane admitted Quagmire became hard to write. The writers pushed the character so far that keeping him funny without becoming seriously disturbing became a problem they could not fully fix. And that is where we start. The Hare Psychopathy Checklist is one of the most well-known tools used to study dangerous or predatory personality traits. It looks at behaviors like manipulation, shallow emotions, lack of guilt, compulsive lying, impulsive actions, and extreme sexual behavior. While it is normally used in real clinical settings, many writers and psychology students have also used it to examine fictional characters. And when people apply those ideas to Glenn Quagmire from Family Guy, the results become surprisingly disturbing. Living a life guided by his sexual addiction in Quahog, Rhode Island, Quagmire doesn't really care for who or what is available for sex. He's always willing to push the boundaries of the sexual frontier. This often puts him in compromising positions. Quagmire scores alarmingly high in almost every area people associate with manipulative and antisocial behavior. Academic discussions about the character regularly describe him as someone showing traits linked to narcissism, hypersexuality, and antisocial personality patterns. Some analysis also connects his behavior to forms of compulsive sexual behavior, often compared to sex addiction. What makes this more unsettling is that none of these behaviors are hidden beneath the surface. The show openly presents them. The audience simply laughs and moves on because the cartoon format softens how serious the actions would seem in real life. From the earliest seasons, Quagmire's behavior already crosses lines that would feel deeply uncomfortable outside comedy. The show repeatedly jokes about him using manipulative tactics to get women, invading private spaces without consent, and abusing his charm and status as an airline pilot to gain attention. These moments are not treated as shocking events inside the world of the show. They're written as recurring jokes and personality quirks. Over time, the audience becomes used to them because the series trains viewers not to think too deeply about what is actually happening. One of the darkest parts of Quagmire's character involves his interactions with Meg Griffin. For much of the series, Meg is underage, yet Quagmire frequently directs inappropriate attention toward her. The jokes are framed as awkward comedy rather than something serious. A famous moment in Season 3 plays this idea directly for laughs when Quagmire suddenly loses interest after learning Meg's age. The joke depends on the audience laughing at the implication instead of questioning what it says about the character. Later, the Season 10 episode focused on Quagmire and Meg pushes the idea even further. Once Meg becomes 18, the show treats Quagmire's interest in her as a possible relationship storyline rather than the continuation of years of uncomfortable behavior. Technically, the show presents it as legal and acceptable within its own rules. But when viewed through a real-world lens, many people see the situation differently. To modern audiences, especially after cultural conversations around grooming and abuse became more common, those earlier scenes feel much darker in hindsight. One of the most interesting moments in the entire series appears in the Season 8 episode, Jerome is the New Black. In this episode, Quagmire delivers a brutal speech attacking Brian Griffin's personality. He calls Brian selfish, fake, manipulative, arrogant, and emotionally dishonest. Fans often consider it one of the strongest speeches in the show, because much of what Quagmire says about Brian is true. But the scene becomes even more fascinating when you realize that nearly every criticism Quagmire makes also describes himself, often to an even greater degree. Psychologically, this can be viewed as projection. Projection happens when someone attacks traits in another person that they secretly possess themselves. The writers seem fully aware of this irony. They allow Quagmire to expose Brian's flaws while quietly revealing his own at the same time. Yet after the speech ends, Quagmire learns nothing from it. The character remains exactly the same, which makes the moment feel strangely self-aware and unsettling. The idea of compulsive sexual behavior also appears repeatedly throughout the series. In psychology, addiction-like behavior often involves escalation, emotional instability, and repeated negative consequences without change. Quagmire shows all three patterns across the show's long run. His behavior becomes more extreme over time, he becomes frustrated when unable to pursue women, and he constantly faces humiliation, rejection, and personal problems without ever truly changing his actions. Quagmire's relationships reveal another major problem. He struggles to build real emotional connections. Even though he seems charming and confident, most of his interactions are shallow, with women treated more like targets than people. The show sometimes hints that he wants real love, but he rarely maintains healthy relationships for long. Audience reactions to Quagmire have also changed over time. In the early 2000s, many viewers saw him as simple shock comedy. But after conversations around consent and harassment became more common, many fans began viewing old episodes differently. This is what makes Quagmire so interesting today. He's still funny, but also far darker than the show openly admits. The research alone paints a very dark picture of Quagmire, but the character was not created from nowhere. The real people and personality types that Seth MacFarlane used as inspiration make the story even more disturbing than the studies suggest. Seth MacFarlane has described Quagmire in interviews as an appalling human being who is still caught in the Rat Pack era, and that description is precise enough to be useful. The voice came from fast-talking 1950s radio personalities, what MacFarlane called a 50s radio guy on cocaine. The catchphrase came from a Jerry Lewis impression developed by writer Steve Marmol. The surname came from a college acquaintance MacFarlane encountered during his Rhode Island years. The specific individual behind Quagmire has never been publicly named. Seth MacFarlane usually describes the inspiration not as one person, but as a type. The outdated ladies' man, the sleazy party personality, or the overconfident pilot who behaves like he never updated his values from another era. It is a general archetype, but detailed enough that the characters feel based on real observation rather than pure invention. The pilot detail is important. Quagmire's job is not random background design. Airline pilots, especially in older cultural eras linked to Rat Pack-style masculinity, held a unique social position. They had authority, constant travel, and access to new people in every city, which created an environment where certain behaviors could be repeated without long-term consequences. The uniform itself adds to this image. It signals status, confidence, and mobility, which becomes part of how the character operates socially rather than just a visual costume choice. Across interviews, MacFarlane has suggested that many Family Guy characters come from real-life observation. He has pointed to people he knew in college, early Hollywood, and entertainment circles as sources of inspiration. Quagmire stands out as the most extreme version of this idea. The personality type he represents is not rare, and many of the behaviors shown are recognizable rather than fictional exaggerations. What makes the Quagmire type interesting is how differently it appears depending on context. In small social settings, someone like this can seem funny, outgoing, and entertaining. Their confidence and social ease makes them enjoyable in groups, where their behavior is framed as performance. The issue becomes clearer in private or less controlled situations, where charm is no longer a performance and consequences are less visible. That is where the same traits can look very different. Whether intentional or not, Quagmire ends up reflecting a real-world behavioral pattern that researchers studying antisocial and predatory traits would recognize in structure. The show exaggerates for comedy, but the underlying personality framework remains grounded in something observable in reality. MacFarlane has also commented on how difficult the character became to write over time. As cultural awareness changed, especially around consent and harassment, keeping Quagmire funny without crossing into something more uncomfortable became increasingly difficult. The humor had its limits, and the writers repeatedly pushed against them. This makes clear that Quagmire was never an accident. He was a deliberate construction built over years, carefully maintained within a comedic framework, even as the implications of his behavior became harder to ignore. The character was built from something real, which means every time the show plays his behavior for laughs, it isn't working entirely from fiction. And that context changes how 3 specific episodes land when you go back and watch them through this lens. Season 8, Episode 18 of Family Guy introduces Quagmire's father, a decorated Navy veteran who visits and announces that he plans to transition and become a woman named Ida. Quagmire reacts with rejection and visible discomfort. Brian then unknowingly sleeps with Ida, finds out the truth later, and the show turns his reaction into a long vomiting gag. This moment was heavily criticized, including by GLAAD, who argued that it reduced a trans woman to a joke built on disgust. Seth MacFarlane later said the episode was meant to be sympathetic overall, and in fairness, the script does try at moments to treat Ida as a real person with respect. But this intention clashes with how the comedy is actually shown. The jokes often rely on shock, discomfort, and ridicule. This is especially clear in Brian's reaction and the repeated focus on disgust, which shapes how the scene feels more than the dialogue does. From a behavior point of view, the episode shows something important about Quagmire. He's usually written as someone who crosses sexual boundaries and does not respect consent. But when his father changes gender, he reacts with strong anger and refuses to accept it. The same character who ignores other people's limits suddenly becomes very strict and defensive when it affects his own family. This contrast creates tension in how Quagmire is written. His known traits, low empathy, poor control of emotions, and impulsive behavior are all clearly shown in this episode. However, the story treats his reaction as normal shock instead of linking it to his sexual behavior across the series. Rather than seeing it as part of his overall personality, the episode presents it as a separate and understandable emotional moment. The episode mixes comedy, shock jokes, and emotional themes, but it never fully handles how they fit together. Ida's identity is used for several jokes, while Quagmire's reaction is shown as a personal issue instead of part of his usual behavior. It is ironic because a character who ignores boundaries struggles with one he cannot accept. But the show does not really explore this contradiction. Season 10, Episode 10 is the one that has aged most visibly in online fan discussion, and the reason is not complicated. The episode waits for Meg to turn 18 and then treats Quagmire's pursuit of her as a legitimate romantic storyline, complete with a secret relationship and a confrontation with Peter that the show plays primarily for comedy about Peter's wounded pride rather than genuine concern about the dynamic at its center. Meg is a character that the show has used as a punching bag across its entire run, and the specific texture of her vulnerability, her desperation for affirmation, her willingness to accept attention from sources that any outside observer would identify as unsafe, is well established by Season 10. The episode leans directly into that vulnerability to make the story work. And what it's really showing, when you look at it in a clinical way, is a power imbalance that has been slowly built up over many years of episodes and is finally being made into an official relationship on screen. The show frames Meg as an adult, so the relationship is treated as legal and meant to feel morally acceptable. However, it ignores the long history of earlier behavior leading up to this moment. When viewed in real-world terms, especially through what is known about grooming over time, that past pattern changes how the relationship is understood and makes it feel more troubling and misleading. Fan reactions to this episode have shifted significantly over time, with rewatches producing responses that first-run viewing did not. Because the cultural vocabulary for describing what the episode is actually depicting has expanded considerably since it aired. Season 8, Episode 7 of Family Guy features Quagmire's speech about Brian, which is often seen as one of the show's smartest moments. When you look at it more closely, it feels different than just a funny scene. Quagmire clearly lists Brian's flaws in a very detailed and confident way, as if he studied him closely. But the irony is that everything Quagmire says about Brian also applies to Quagmire himself, often in an even stronger and more extreme way. In psychology, projection is when someone sees their own flaws in other people without realizing it. That is what's happening here. Quagmire points out Brian's bad traits, but he actually has the same ones himself. The joke works because Brian really does act that way, so it feels true on the surface, but it also works on a deeper level because Quagmire is describing himself without knowing it, which creates irony. What this scene really shows is that the writers knew exactly what they had created. The awareness is already built into the dialogue. Quagmire is written in a way that lets him point out someone else's flaws, while also showing the same problems in himself. It's smart character writing hidden inside a joke rant. This also suggests that Quagmire's darker traits were not random, but intentionally built into the character from the start. The real question is not whether Quagmire is good or bad, but why a character built on such a disturbing psychological pattern has stayed popular for over 20 years on Family Guy. It says something about how animation creates distance, turning real behavior into comedy so the audience laughs without fully processing what is being shown. The show has been aware of what Quagmire represents, even if it hides it in humor. Moments like the Jerome speech and comments from Seth MacFarlane show the writers understood the kind of personality they were building. Quagmire is not an accident, but a deliberate exaggeration of a real-world type shaped for comedy. Once you remove the humor, the laughter starts to feel heavier. You're no longer just watching a cartoon character. You're seeing a distorted reflection of real behavior that exists outside the show, without jokes or consequences to soften it. If you found this breakdown interesting, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden layers behind popular shows and characters. See you next time!